help me welcome Genevieve Walsh, who is here to talk to us about how to do research.
Okay, so this is, first of all, the most presumptuous title anybody's ever had. Well, the most presumptuous title I've had for a talk, actually. So this is going to be completely biased from my own personality, so how I found things that work for me that might be totally opposite of what works for you. And it's also biased by my very small amount of experience I've had helping other people to do research. Okay, so that's very small. For example, I haven't had a single PhD student actually graduate. So the one dissertation that I actually know about is my own. Okay, but that's only one. Okay, so that's not a lot of evidence, and every dissertation is different. So you should all keep that in mind. Okay, so there's different types of information that I can give you. There's like practical, and then there's like Uber.
With the umlaut. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, umlaut. I'm not a very good speller. Uber. Okay, but so I want to start with it. So I don't want to just give you Uber like guidelines. I also want to give you some practical, just like tips that you should feel free to not follow. In fact, whenever any professor or person that seems to be of some type of higher rank than you gives you advice, you should always take a minute and be like, now, is that what I want to do, or is that not what I want to do? You should never just automatically do whatever they suggest.
Especially if they give the advice in finger quotes.
Yeah. Especially if they give the advice in finger quotes. Okay, so Uber, and this is actually the most important thing. This is the only thing that I think is actually a requirement for doing research. And another thing, this is going to be biased by not only my own personality, but my own field. So I'm in pure math. So if you're in applied, a lot of your even practical tips might be totally diametrically opposite of what you should be doing. Okay? But the Uber thing is that you must like what you're doing. Like / love / be nuts about what you're doing. Okay, this is a requirement. Okay, for doing research. There is no point to getting a math PhD if you don't like what you're doing. There's just no point. The status, the money, the glory are not enough for what you're doing. Okay?
That wasn't a joke, guys.
This implies there's glory.
Whatever amount of glory that there may be, it's not enough to justify doing something. Like, don't just be like, oh, I've got to work on this really hard problem because somebody thought it was important. The number of people that know the correct statement of whatever most famous problem is like, you can count them on your fingers and your toes, you know, with bounded error. So but however important it is, whatever famous genius there is in mathematics, most people don't know about them. Okay, so you have to get a little perspective. So if you don't love what you're doing, you should do something else. There's no point. Okay, and also the other thing is, and it goes along with what you must do a lot of work. Okay, and this is something that gets very slippery. So you'll see famous people and they act like they're not doing anything. They totally act like they're just wandering around, looking at the window. Total BS. Total, don't believe any of them. The people that are hotshot researchers, they're working all the time. Not that you have to work all the time, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do. It's much harder than your class and super technical topic. It's much harder than, you know, organizing your wardrobe or figuring out how to go to the dentist or going to the grocery store or teaching your class or any of the other things you have to do in your life. Okay, it's hard and it's going to require like your energy and your time. Because it's going to require some sort of significant investment of you. And if you don't love it, there's no point in that. Okay, so that's why these are the only like 2 things that you really need to know. So I could just leave now. But really, it really is. And I think that this gets overlooked because you're so busy like passing orals and taking qualifying exams and jumping through this hoop and the other hoop, and you got to figure out who your advisor is, and you got to figure out what your topic is, and you got to go to this conference and you got to do that conference. What we don't realize is that your research sometimes gets like brushed to the end, but it's the most important thing that you can do, and it's the most difficult thing that you'll do as well. Okay, so don't just brush it away because you're doing all these other little important things. So that's really, really hard. Okay, so let's go back to practical. Okay, so I had this book. So if you've taken the class from me, you know that I like to give a source for something. So there's a source I had when I was a graduate student. So it was called How to Write Your Dissertation in 15 minutes a day. Okay, so this is a book by somebody. It doesn't matter who it's by, it's the title that matters. Okay, so this might be contradictory to everything I said over there, but it's not. They just made it this title, like sort of like, you know, when you're in high school and someone's running for office and they're like sex on their little poster. It has nothing to do with this book. Has nothing to do with this. But this is just to get you to buy it, which you should, or at least look at it online. You can look at like 8 pages of it online, which is really all you need. So, but it has some practical tips. So it's mainly geared, this book is actually mainly geared towards people that are in the humanities. So it's a very different thing because that's more about writing. So this is more about the writing part of your dissertation, but this is also like a huge, gulp. So in math, you can actually separate the doing versus the writing. So you can have something completely done, meaning it can be completely proved, and you can have your research done, but you still have this other step where you have to actually write your dissertation. Okay, and that's the part that actually can take a long time. And some people have varying levels of writing skills, and that's the part where a lot of practical advice can help you. So that's the part where like a writing group can help you. That's the part where taping yourself to your chair can help you. Okay, so that's the point where you might need a lot of different like little tricks to get you to do this like pretty vast task that's going to happen. And also, you've spent the past 10 years not writing anything. So this is kind of a problem. So you spent time like doing problems, doing computations, sitting in class, going to talks, giving talks. You've done all this stuff, but you haven't ever like written a paper, and all of a sudden you have to write a dissertation, which is usually like 50 to 100 pages or something. So it's ridiculous. You don't have any writing tips at all. So what you should do is you should learn to write mathematics. And I wish that I had done this. I didn't. And one way you could learn to write mathematics is you need to write mathematics. So that's kind of silly. You need to get other people to read it. And you need to edit. So even before you've finished doing the stuff for your dissertation, which is a very amorphous process, like what is it exactly you're supposed to do? You don't have any idea, and we can't tell you because we don't know. That's something that you have to figure out what you have to do. Like that's hard. But even before you're done with this hugely difficult process of doing all of the mathematics that you want to do, you might want to take some time to write little arguments up. Like maybe, just for example, your professor in hyperbolic geometry gives a really sloppy argument in class. So what you could do is you could write that up nicely. So that's good for you because you're going to go in and you're going to fill in those details or slight errors and figure out some mathematics. But also you're going to learn how to write. And writing mathematics is really hard. If you've ever read math papers or if you've ever refereed math papers, the vast majority of them are written at just a horrendous level. So you might want to try just like writing up some little things. Like if you like to type, that's great. It's certainly good to know how to type. But even just writing it out longhand, like how would this argument go? Like how would I explain this concept that wasn't explained particularly well to me? Like how would I explain something? And it should be something that you kind of care about that's sort of related to your research as well. Okay, and that way you'll learn a little bit more about it. But that's a good exercise to do. And so so this writing part is a whole separate issue. And there's lots of books and lots of people and lots of writing experts, and especially at Tufts, there's like writers everywhere. Everyone's like an English major, English professor, English postdoc here. So you just like walk out into the street, like knock somebody over and tell them to read your dissertation. So you have a lot of resources here that you should try and take advantage of when you're at this stage. Those people can't help you at all when you're doing math. Okay, they can't help you at all. And that's actually, so this is the easier part, but it's something that you shouldn't overlook, and that you can even, when you're maybe like stuck with the doing math side, you can say, okay, I'm going to try to write up this other thing really well that maybe is fully known. It might go into the introduction or might not, but I'm just going to write this up for practice. It's something to do so that you're still doing math when you're stuck on the actual hard part, which is doing the research, which is what I'm supposed to be talking about, which I haven't really talked about. Okay, so this is actually hard. Okay, so there's also many different phases to this. There's finding questions that you like. Okay, so this part's hard too. And then there's, once you get settled on a question, what are you going to do? Okay, so for both of these, so this is supposed to be practical over here on this board. Okay, for both of these, I find that, and this is just something that I like to do, but it's also something that I noticed when I was looking in the How to Write Your Dissertation in 15 Minutes a Day, book is that you can just keep a journal. Okay, and not a journal, so I try to keep a journal now, but I mess it up. I take it with me to a talk and I end up taking notes on the talk and it gets all messed up. You shouldn't do that. What you should do is you should have a journal that's just for like your math thoughts. So maybe like after you've gone away from the talk, maybe you did like something about the talk, but don't just like write down everything don't like take notes for the talk in your journal. Go back and think, oh, what did I like about this? What was interesting? How does that relate to that problem that I was thinking about? Just so that you can remember, oh, something came up that was interesting and I don't want to forget about it. Like, let's remember that I really like this problem that someone mentioned a while ago, and I didn't really know how to approach it or even how to think about this problem at all. But maybe if you keep writing about it, you'll think, now, what's going on with this problem? You just think about it a little bit more, really, 15 minutes a day, thinking about some problem that you love that you have no idea how to do, and maybe something, like sometimes something from some other class or sometimes from a talk or something that randomly comes into your math life will have relation to that problem. So don't forget about the problems that you love. So even if they're really hard or they don't seem tractable or you're not really sure how they would have anything to do with your professor's interests or whatever, don't forget about those things. So keep them in your journal and keep them like in your thoughts, and then when something that's relevant, so math is weird in that you can be thinking about some problem and not getting anywhere, but having new information that may or may not be related to the problem sometimes helps that problem, or sometimes maybe just gets your brain going on that particular problem. But if you're so busy taking notes on every little detailed thing that you're going to forget about the actual research that you're working on. So don't forget about your actual problem that's like your baby that you love. Don't forget about it. So remember your problems. I mean, they're not really your problems, they're everybody's problems, but the ones that you wanted to think about, like don't forget about them. Like write things down. Remember your ideas that have come up. And then I also like to write down, so that's like sort of like what to do once you're settled, or just how to incorporate all the things that are coming into your brain, because you should be going to a lot of seminars, going to a lot of talks, going to a lot of stuff. And how are you going to process all this incoming information? You need to let go of a lot of it, because a lot of it isn't going to be relevant, but some of it is going to be relevant. And as you progress further along, you should probably go to fewer and fewer of those things. But as a graduate student, you should be going to a lot. You should be just going to a ton of things. And you might go to the talk and you might think this speaker is horrible, this talk isn't relevant to what I'm doing, and it's fine. You can think about something else. It's totally fine. You don't have to process every bit of information that comes into you, but you need to be exposed to a lot of different ideas. So going to conferences is good. Okay, so I'm not going to erase this Uber because I said these things and you're never going to forget them, right? Okay, so keep a journal. Okay, so what to do? So this is sort of like, this is a very difficult phase, finding questions and kind of figuring out what you're going to do. And this could change. So you could think, oh, I found this great question, and it could change. And that's great. So sometimes you can just, if you're not sure what question you want to do, you can just pick some question and start working on it. Just pick something, just do something. And then know that you can change your mind if you feel like it. It's totally fine. It's actually good. But just work on something a little bit. Just try to do some questions just to start feeling what it feels like to think about something that's not done already, because that's new. But this is actually a really difficult stage, and at this stage you need to be exposed to a lot of stuff. You need to be going to a lot of seminars, a lot of upper level classes. You can go to seminars at other places. You can read stuff online. There's lots of ways to be exposed to stuff. You don't have to go to somebody's class. You don't have to go to the seminar. But you need to have incoming information incoming at you when you're finding questions, because you need to know what's going on. So you have to figure that out somehow. You can look on the archive. I think Kim talked a little bit about just being aware of your field last time, all those kind of things. But what you want is information coming at you that you can relate to. And you want to process it somehow, because it's going to be a ton of information. It's going to be overwhelmingly too much. So you want to keep a journal. You want to think about, what is it I like? What is it I actually want to do? What am I really attracted to about this particular set of ideas? Like, what is it about this topic or this way of thinking that I like, that I feel like I can do something with, that's mine? Okay, because when you do research, it's going to be you understanding something. Oh, I do want to say one thing about this. So I was going to make this chart. So there's so when you're in classes, so here you are taking classes. So this is a difficult chart. You're taking classes, you're super great, you're passing all the orals, you're getting A's, you're filling out all your forms, you're good at taking tests, you're all this stuff. There's all this kind of stuff. And then there's writing papers. Okay, and then there's this big gap in between here. How do you go from here to here? Okay, so the thing that you need to try to do, and that actually is what you sort of should be doing in a class, but what you're not always doing because you're so busy jumping through hoops, is you should be trying to understand something. So when you're in a class, there's all kinds of other just total garbage that's going on in a class, but what you really should be doing in your class is trying to understand something. Maybe not understanding everything, but you should be trying to understand something. And it's different because you've got this professor standing up who acts like they understand it. Okay, but that's not really what's going on in a class. That's total falsehood, that the professor understands it and they're transmitting the information into your brain. What's happening is that you're supposed to be understanding something. So there's something out there, there's some facts, there's some, or not some facts, just some ideas, some problems, and you're trying to understand them. They just happen to be things that people have already thought about a lot, but it's still the same thing. And that's exactly what's going on here. You're supposed to be understanding something. So don't just write a paper, and I've done this and I'm not happy about it. There's all these different theorems, and you can put them all together in the different order, and out comes some theorem. But that doesn't mean you actually understood what was going on. That's not what the point of mathematics is. You're supposed to be understanding something. And you can write a paper, and this is a great kind of first paper to write, that is just a different perspective on something that's already well understood by the rest of the world. So your understanding is a valuable contribution to that. So the more you understand stuff, then doing the research will just sort of come, because you'll be understanding something in a different way or a different part of it than people have done before. Does that make sense? So what you really want to do is not get some result X, and it's very hard not to say this. It's very hard to say, I want result X, and then I'll be done with my dissertation, and then fame and fortune, blah, blah, blah. But what you actually want is to understand something. And that's kind of hard, and that's why you might want to be keeping a journal. You might want to be thinking about a small set of things that you really want to try to understand. And if you really understand them, because it's your personal self, you'll understand them differently from other people, and you'll have a slightly different set of results than is actually out there now. So that's what you want to try to do, is try to understand something. Okay, and then, so I've abandoned the Uber. That's sort of Uber, though. That kind of goes on that floor. So, but another practical thing, and this is sort of, I'm trying to go back and forth between Uber and practical. So another practical thing is, and this is very personal bias. This might not work for you, but it's a pretty strong personal bias. And that is give lots of talks. Okay, and that's because when you're over here in this phase where you're taking classes, so there's two reasons for this. One is when you're over here in this phase and you're taking lots of classes, you have all these built-in little motivators. You've got a test, you've got class coming up on every Tuesday, and you're going to want to be keeping up with the class. you've got some paper maybe you have to write or something you have to do for the class, whatever kind of class it is. But like when you go into this world, you suddenly like drop off the side of the cliff and there's no like little toe holes for you to hold on to. There's no like next thing that you're supposed to do. But if you're giving a talk on Thursday about something even vaguely related to your research, you're going to be paying attention to that. And you're not going to be worrying so much about exactly, oh, I've got to remember, like, memorize this and that and the other thing. You actually might be thinking about that, and that's going to help get you thinking. So I would suggest giving lots of talks when you're at the stage where you're done. So not your first or second year. Don't come in and start trying to give talk your first or second year because you're going to be overwhelmed and you've got too much. You're still sort of in this phase where you need to be jumping through hoops and performing. But when you're done with this jumping through hoops phase, whenever you feel like you're done jumping through hoops, then you can start giving talks done with jumping through hoops. And I actually give a lot of talks now. I give talks all the time now, and it's maybe even a flaw. Maybe I give too many talks. But I feel like it's a good motivator, and it's a good way to get me, I really think about something about a talk, because first of all, it's embarrassing if you don't know what you're doing. Embarrassment is a great, fear is like sharpens the mind, you know, it's true. But also, when I'm preparing for a talk, I think about all the different aspects of the problem. I don't just think about, like if you're preparing for a test, you really only care about what's going to be on the test. Right? But if you're preparing for a talk, it's a really open-ended thing. So I say, oh, I might want to say something about this little thing that I think is true, but I'm not really sure. And that's the way I kind of push my research. Like I might say all this stuff that's completely nailed down during the talk, but then I'm going to say a little bit something else. I'm going to push it a little bit more because that makes my talk more exciting. Even if I'm not completely sure it's true, then I'll sort of stick that in there. And so giving talks is a good way. And when I was a postdoc, I actually had a policy. This was not advertised, I didn't put this on my website, that anybody, anywhere that asked me any talk, I would say yes. It didn't matter, I would drive across Texas and give a talk wherever, I didn't care. And first of all, so that I feel like that helped me because of this thing I'm saying where I thought about the math that I was doing and tried to push it. It's a pain in the butt because driving across Texas is a pain in the butt. Driving to wherever is a pain. Dealing with the airplane and making sure your shirts doesn't have coffee all over it for your talk is a pain, you know? It's a lot, it's a lot of work. But it's good because, so first of all, it helps you just actually with your research, but also giving talks is like a huge skill for later on. And you're going to, at some point, you're going to be in a job interview situation where when push comes to shove, often the person that gets the better talk gets a job at the end. I mean, you're going to need to have a resume, you're going to give papers, blah, blah, blah. You're going to need to have a dissertation, for example, right? But getting that experience now is invaluable. So you'll be completely comfortable during a stressful interview situation with giving a talk because you'll have given 200 talks. And that's such a leg up on the person who has written their paper and spent a lot of time, but they get to their talk and they freeze, they can't do it, it's a stressful situation. When you've given 200 and they've given 1, you're going to have a big advantage. So that's sort of further down the line, but there's 2 reasons for doing that. One is that it gives you a leg up in the eventual interview process. Even if you're interviewing for like some kind of non-math job or at an industry or something, giving a lot of talks is going to enable you to talk about your research in a way that quickly communicates what you've done to someone else. And most people that are fresh PhDs cannot do that at all. So if you're having the chance to get that ability is something you should not give up. You should do it if you can. This is my personal bias because I happen to kind of like it too. So if you hate it, you might just want to do it a little bit, but I would definitely suggest doing it some. Probably a little more than you're comfortable with. Okay. So practical will give lots of talks. And then you should write stuff down. So I should follow my own advice. So I did this better when I was a graduate student than I do it now, but after I would talk to my advisor. So my advisor was the type who wasn't very clear about what was going on. It was always totally vague. I always had like 7,000 questions by the time I was done with the meeting. So I would go and I would try to write like what happened, just like what happened that last hour. And then I would try to say like, what were we talking about? And then maybe like look up some of the words or kind of like just process it in some way. Or what was it that I totally didn't understand? And maybe you can go ask some other professor about it. That's always a great idea. to say like, there was this word and it was totally unclear and I think it's something. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's that thing, blah, blah, blah. They might be able to give a different perspective on it or make a coherent statement about it that makes you happier than what happened in your meeting that you're supposed to have. So I found that was really relevant. I try to do that now, but I'm not as systematic about it because I have too many other things to do because I'm flawed, but I should. So that's something I would write stuff down like, and as soon as possible. So you're going to have lots of questions. Some questions that are just, and some of these questions, so when you write stuff down from whenever you have any kind of research experience with anyone, not just with your major advisor, or not just with a professor, but when you're talking to, Charlie in the hall, something you're going to, later when you process this conversation, you're going to have some questions. Some of those questions will be things that are well known, that someone might be able to answer, or might be able to point you to a reference. And some of those questions might be things that aren't known. So some of those questions are going to be dumb questions, some are going to be medium questions, the things that you might want to learn about, and some of them might be new questions that you thought of yourself. This is really the best way to come up with a question. It's not the only way, but when you have a question about something that you want to answer, it's the most motivating question. Okay, to get this because you're going to have to work on it forever and ever and ever, and if you came up with it, it was some question that you actually naturally had versus one that your advisor laid down on you, you're going to have much more motivation and much more likelihood of success and interest in it. So some of these might be good. Okay, so I'll go covered. Okay, so when you're starting to do research, I think this finding questions, finding your field, getting settled into a research topic is one of the most difficult things that you can do. I think this is sort of the hardest. The easy way to do this is to pick some professor that you just happen to like and you like the way they talk and then start talking to them and ask them what to do. Okay, you can do that, and that's totally fine. But there should be a significant input from you about what it is you want to do because you ultimately have to do it. And so it doesn't really matter what the professor thinks is cool if you don't think it's cool. First of all, they could be wrong. And second of all, who cares if they're right? You have to think it's cool. So this takes a bunch of stuff. Once you're settled, what to do, there's a bunch of practical things you can do to make yourself have time for your research. One thing some people like to do that I wish I did, so a lot of this advice I'm giving I don't follow, but I wish I did, is have a set time of the day where I'm okay, sometime in the day where you're productive. So maybe from 1 to 3 is your brain siesta time, so that's a bad time for you to do it. But maybe that's a good time. Maybe you're finally getting awake and you've had enough coffee by then. But some type of time of the day when you're sort of productive, take some time that's going to be 2 or 3 hours of nobody bothering me not looking at the internet, me not going to the dentist, me not teaching, me not having office hours, me not going to whatever. Some time that's just going to be where you're actually going to think about the problems that you're supposed to be thinking about. So that's a luxury that I don't have because I'm teaching a lot of classes, but you might be able to make that into your life, and that's something you should do while you have the chance. So yeah, give a lot of talks, write everything down, be perfect, always be engaged in everything. All right, more questions. Oh yeah, and then when you're a postdoc, so they're sort of from going from classes to writing your dissertation into just being research being your main thing that you do. This is all a continuum. It's not things will happen you'll pass your orals and you will technically be out of this box into the next box. But it's really more of a continuum. You want to stop just taking information at face value and start trying to understand it and ask questions about it. And it really should start here and it should continue. And even when you're a postdoc, you should be maybe sitting in on classes, maybe learning stuff. I still learn stuff all the time. I have a lot to learn. Math is infinite. There's lots of graduate level topics that I don't know about that I'm learning about. And so you want to keep getting inputs of information, but you also want to keep questioning about it. And you should even start now, whatever stage you are, you should start trying to understand this, trying to ask questions about the thing that you're doing. Okay, so is that completely clear? Does anybody have any? Oh, and someone asked how to do. Okay, so suppose you settle on a basic because you have some question. How do you know when to stop working on some question? Okay, so that is a really tricky point that I'm not particularly good at. But First of all, if you're not learning anything, you want to stop. Especially if you've been not learning anything and you've been working on something for a while. If you're like, so this happens a lot with me, so this is particular to my research, with some kind of combinatorial argument. I'm like, oh, well, I can just twist this little thing around here, twist this little thing around here, and I really think this is going to work out. So that might be true. So, and I spent months trying to prove something that actually is true, but I don't think it can be proved that way. And so I was like, oh, I know I can just twist it over, twist it around this way, and it'll work. I know I can just twist it around this way, twist it around. And why should I have stopped? Okay, so one, it wasn't working. The statement happened to be true, so the intuition about the statement being true was completely right. But also I wasn't learning anything. Like I wasn't learning about a new concept. Like I wasn't getting any better as a mathematician by trying to make twisting around this way and twisting around that way work out. So even if it was eventually going to work out, like it's probably like after a while of doing that, you should kind of stop. If you're not getting better as a mathematician, working on some technical argument, if you're not learning anything, like I don't think it's worth it, mainly because you got to like what you're doing and you've got to improve as a mathematician. So that's a kind of hint that you might want to stop. Oh, and Terrence has some awesome advice. So there's my two references on his webpage about, and interestingly, his advice for faculty members is like, I'm still trying to work out. But advice for graduate students is actually pretty good. And postdocs too is like how to incorporate research into your thing, how to like do well in your classes. But he's just, this might be a high ideal to strive for, but it's still like the technical, practical advice there is very good, I think. Any questions?
Can you overwork yourself?
Yes, that's a very good question. You can. You can especially overwork yourself when you're like, I know if I just twist it this way and then twist it that way, it's going to work out. Okay, so, and you can get too tired, you can get burnt out. So, and that definitely happens to people. That happens to people sometimes in graduate school. So you don't want that to happen. So that's part of like loving what you're doing. If you're hating it, that's a sign that you might be getting burnt out. So you might want to switch topics, you might want to work on some different problem. That's also a sign that you might want to work on some different project. You might want to drop out of graduate school. It's totally okay. There's a rest of a world out there of people who are normal. Don't think that it's bad. You know, it's not. So if you don't like it, if you're having a horrible time, even if you're being really successful, you shouldn't stay. I'm going to get fired for saying this. But you shouldn't, right? You should do something that you like. If you're not loving it, there's no point. You're like $1,800 a month or whatever it is not worth it. You know? So you should like it. And if you're getting tired out and you're, just don't do it. More questions?
Let's first thank Genevieve.